Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for PointClear Solutions webinar, 5 Keys to Designing a User Experience that Drives Patient Engagement. Before we officially kick things off, I want to take a moment to touch on 2 quick housekeeping items. First of all, we will be accepting questions via GoToWebinar's chat function throughout the webinar. We will make sure we reserve some time at the end for Q&A, at which time we'll address any questions you guys may have. To submit a question, toward the bottom of your control panel, you should see a type your message box and then a drop down where you can select who sees your message. We ask that you send your questions to organizers only. And so if you have a question, please send it on over and we will make sure that we make time to address it during the Q&A at the end of the webinar. Secondly, we will be recording today's webinar and sharing it with each of you via email tomorrow, so just a reminder to keep an eye on your inboxes in case there's anything you want to review or share. Okay, now on to the main event. Today's webinar is going to be led by David Issa. David is PointClear's Chief Experience Officer. David is charged with leading PointClear Solutions' digital strategy and design teams to drive the vision and strategies for all healthcare client projects. Now more than 15 years into his career and a part of the PointClear team since 2010, David honed his skills as an entrepreneur and co-founder of the enterprise software company ZenLogic, where he helped design, build, and manage solutions for clients, including Bloomberg, the CDC Foundation, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. David attended Keio University's Graduate School of Media Design in Tokyo, Japan. Welcome, David.
Hello, everyone. Very happy to be here. Today, as Laura mentioned, we're going to be discussing patient engagement and specifically 5 keys to designing user experiences that can help support and drive patient engagement. It's something that I know, a topic that I know is very near and dear to all of us in the healthcare industry because it's becoming more of a strategic imperative for all of us. So after a brief introduction about innovation and I think more specifically what setting the context for innovation in healthcare and its importance in driving patient engagement, I'm going to dive into each of the keys listed: empathy, simplicity, clarity, perspective, and vision, to give you a more tangible and tactical idea of what is meant by these terms and how they can aid you in your efforts towards driving incredible solutions and products. First, though, I want to begin with a quote I think that symbolizes the root of the problem we are facing. Ross Donaldson, the author of The Last Award, wrote, "Just when you are at your weakest and least able to make all the phone calls, traverse the maze of insurance, and plead for healthcare referrals is that one time when your life may depend on it." And what I really like about this, in addition to sort of the photo in the background, is it emphasizes 2 important factors that to what we're discussing today. One is that when people really begin to learn about healthcare and how it works, its different idiosyncrasies and so forth, they're often in the worst state of mind to really understand and traverse its complexity. Secondly, symbolized, I think, by the photo in the background and implied within the quote, the healthcare industry is so fractured. It makes both learning and engaging, with a patient not only a fractured event, but a difficult one, because we're operating. We don't know how much information that the patient has on hand or is aware of, so that we can pick that conversation up from where we left off. And this is very important because the landscape sets the foundation for innovation and how we make improvements towards engaging them. So what is innovation within this context? This is a sort of an MBA kind of 101 introduction of the 3 horizons of innovation that exist. It's a business concept, and this model really acts as a blueprint for companies to balancing their attention to investments in both current performance and then opportunities for growth. So In Horizon 1, we have innovation that sustains market share or attracts new customers. That's your incremental innovation. And you can think about that as those incremental features or pieces that really kind of help to move the needle in smaller ways. Those are your safe zone bets in driving the product forward. And then you have the breakthrough innovation, right? This is innovation that begins to step out from the core business and creates breakthroughs in business performance. So if Horizon 1 is sort of your health record and features that are associated with that, introducing telehealth as it would be something that could be considered a breakthrough innovation that's beginning to change the business model and how people engage. And then lastly, we have that Horizon 3, which is the disruptive innovation, the entirely new territory, new products and services, business and business models. And these are the ones where we've heard, you hear about the Ubers of the world and disrupting these industries. And what ends up happening is a lot of people want to focus on that disruptive innovation without necessarily considering the first two horizons. We almost want to leapfrog into those areas. And where that becomes dangerous is in healthcare specifically. Healthcare is a very highly regulated and fractured market. And it is critical to balance the concept of innovation with where the industry is as a whole. So I posit in this way that driving patient engagement, while it is a strategic imperative for the healthcare industry as a whole, because healthcare is so complicated and interconnected, we need to balance what we believe the ideal solution enabled by current technologies that exist out there today, like the Ubers of the world, what those may be with what the right solution for the patients and the industry as the whole is. And in this context, and light, I am saying that innovation in healthcare really lives at the intersection of business, technology, design, and policy. So delivering innovation that advances each of these areas appropriately and in a balanced manner within the context of the healthcare industry, not just the technical industry or where technology lives today, is critical to driving patient engagement in a meaningful way. In this webinar, we ask you to begin focusing on defining the right solution by focusing on the 5 keys to driving patient engagement. And doing so will allow you to innovate at this intersection of design, technology, business, and policy, thereby driving in patient engagement for your product and services in a meaningful way. More importantly, though, we hope it will up-level the industry as a whole, allowing us to eventually arrive at the ideal state that I think we all tend to vision and strive for, because it is truly what we desire. Why is this, though? Well, it's because healthcare at the end of the day is a team sport, and we must work well with not just the folks in our company, but our partners and vendors as well, in order to deliver that holistic patient experience and engagement that we're focused on. So with the following keys, we will begin to explore what are the little things that you can do within the context of your specific niche in healthcare, as to begin helping to move this needle and begin to take this broader context into perspective as you make critical decisions for your product and your patients and your users. The first key is empathy. And I don't think I need to dive into this, but knowing your user and the people that you are serving is absolutely critical to making sure that you're designing the right solution at the end of the day. The first pillar in empathy is context, and context is king. Understanding the full context of how and where your product will be used is critical to understanding its value to users, whether they be patients, providers, payers, and or other partners. So really understanding, the where and the how is becoming increasingly more important as technology begins to splinter across devices, right? Whether it be a watch, augmented reality glasses, your mobile phone, your desktop, and so forth. What we begin to try to understand is the location, the environments, the things that are happening around a user and where they may be seeking what information at what time. Things that can help you out in this regard are things like contextual inquiries and user interviews, which help you to identify the problems your users truly need help with, and then leveraging things like journey maps, which can visualize and provide a great means for cataloging those needs and opportunities. The important facet is not to leave these as one and done activities though, but use them to guide strategy sessions and project planning discussions in an ongoing manner with your teams. The second pillar to empathy is understanding that your users don't know what they really want. And I know we've probably, you hear a lot about talking with your users, making sure that you're listening to them. And what often happens is direct interpretation of something a user said. The struggle with this is that users really don't know what they want until they use it. And in that light, you'll see that on the left-hand side, we have all these beautifully designed weather apps, right? And they all more or less probably serve the same needs. And if we ask these users, hey, which weather app do you like the best? It may come down to a subjective decision. I really don't like purple. I like black and white, and that's the one. However, our population is very diverse, and we want to create things that live at the intersection of need. And if we're focusing on designing for the user's need and intent, then great design will follow. And we realize that at the source of all of this is users are really trying to just figure out whether they need an umbrella, a coat. There's a follow-up action to the inquiry that really gets to the root of the problem. So be sure to hypothesize, what your users want, but don't presume. All right, we're scientists, so we want to take that hypothesis-driven approach without being prescriptive in the end result. And being a scientist, though, we often seek objective answers that give us the definitive yes/no of moving forward. However, when trying to paint experiences and get to understanding need, we want to seek subjective answers in narrative form. So don't listen to what your users say, rather attempt to understand what they mean. And start with the why, and then ask why the user is using your technology at a particular point in time, and then begin to design your software and testing plans, from that perspective. So for designers and developers out there, remember that users are often not going to know what they want up front until they begin to see and use something, so that they can begin to formulate an opinion that is juxtaposed potentially to other things that they know of in their environment. Another critical pillar in building empathy is embracing a people-focused strategic planning process. This is something that we have baked in not only in our design process, where we develop personas and so forth, but work with clients to help them figure out how they can begin making these human-centered decisions throughout their organization at both a business and a technical level. Personas are fictional characters created to represent the different user types, describing their goals, desires, pain points, limitations within their current products or workflows. And by bringing these individuals into your strategic planning process, you're better determined priorities, features, and needs at a human level that cut across the organizational silos within your company. So we're not beginning to look at a feeding frenzy as it relates to how much budget is allocated towards, say, the mobile project that you have going on versus the enterprise core web app projects there. But now we begin to take a look at how each of these features across the different products are important to the individual we're attempting to achieve. And in that context, don't be afraid to begin to take those personas to that next level, tying key metrics to those individuals, so that when you approach your next strategic planning session, you're beginning by asking, who are the individuals that we need to speak to this quarter? What are their biggest needs? And then you begin focusing on the experiences and the journeys prioritizing the experiences and the journeys that people have, rather than the internal features or silos that in there. And in that context, you can really begin to drive out different, more strategic plan and framework around that silo that cuts across the different silos that may exist within your organization. So if you walking away from you here today as you consider how you can drive empathy within your organization, consider setting up a user advisory program that allows you to get continuous feedback from your user base, and require your project teams to listen and observe that feedback firsthand. What this will do is begin to open up the doors for conversation if they don't exist today, so that you can begin considering the perspective in which you take towards driving human-centered solutions, and ensuring that empathy is something that is continuously being built up over time within the organization, rather than a single project effort. The second key to driving patient engagement is simplicity. And simplicity is, in this definition, the process of building confidence. And user confidence really is the objective of both simplicity, and it is what drives that engagement. So it's not just about the aesthetics of a screen, but rather the discipline of attempting to simplify the application and how you engage and speak with your user over a course of time. And there's a couple of pillars that can really help support this cause within your decision-making framework. The first is really being ruthless about information hierarchy and content strategy. This is a key linchpin in your application, and if you operate off of not a well-organized information hierarchy and content strategy, it will complicate your efforts to engage with that patient in a meaningful ways. So understand your user's primary needs, and then how those needs evolve as they navigate your software. One aspect that we do to attempt to solve this problem is we begin with those key tasks and user flows, which you see in the above slide, and begin to understand how the context of the journey and the interrelationship of those screens work, and then begin to build the organizational hierarchy of information as it relates to that, so that users have complete narratives end to end. And in this way, we're able to identify and balance the use of content, that alerts, is going to simplify the task or enrich the experience. Hierarchy is not just about content organization, but also the visual display of that content. And, from a visual standpoint, hierarchy signifies importance by structuring something to be more or less obvious. It clearly separates information to signal a change from one level of content to another, and then items in higher contrast to things around them are recognized first. So in the example that I'm showing here, even if we blur out, the image, kind of do the squint eye test, there's a clear understanding of what information is key directionally for a user. They understand the concept, even in the blurred out section, of a title, a subheading, and then the paragraph text that drives that. What this does for a user is not only create a consistency of where they should look for key information, but if this were a big web page with lots of content on there, users are going to know to scan the titles for potentially the topic that they're interested in, and then dive into those details for later on. And these subtle changes are what help to drive the simplicity of an application, or the perceived simplicity of an application as it goes. Last but not least, you want to make sure that these stories are mapped to the user journey. And this is where it's understanding kind of how a user's moving throughout the application, and if you have multiple applications, through each of your channels, and making sure that you're identifying the touch points that matter most or are critical at any point in time, so that you're keeping that context, within the frame of mind, and you're simplifying, meaning getting rid of any of the extraneous information that exists on the page to support that core activity at hand. Last pillar in simplicity is really beginning to invest in and use visualizations to display complex healthcare data in insightful and actionable ways. Pictures tell 1,000 words, and interactive pictures can tell 1,000,000. Doing so is going to increase the perceived simplicity of your application while encouraging aligned decision-making and thought processes. You focus on accurate interpretation of the data with quick and easy drill down and analysis into details rather than the reverse. So just because you have information in a database doesn't always mean you need to display it, and how you display it can drive meaningful results in how individuals begin to understand the nature. This demo is from an investment that Steve Ballmer made in helping individuals understand the complexity of taxes, both where that money is coming from, with how we are spending it as a nation. And what is interesting about this is that this data is freely available out there for the general population to consume, but what is novel is by leveraging this flow diagram and interactive take on that data, you're able to drive cognition and understanding around that data very quickly and very easily, so that individuals can dive into the details and begin exploring more important and more complex questions that are ultimately going to drive greater nuances and competitive advantages for your product. Another pillar is assuming that people will not receive training. Your goal should be to make your solution intuitive enough for users to do the basics from day one, coaching them on the use of your application in an iterative manner, and then being prepared to teach them on how to do more advanced things, either in context or on demand. What this does is, in today's sort of software as a service driven world where people perceive web applications as websites, and in mobile applications they expect those to be simple and fun, you want to be able to build confidence with your users out the gate, and then allow them to get up and going immediately so that they feel that excitement about your application, and then they feel, more importantly though, feel excited about figuring out potentially the more complex or advanced features of your application. So ensuring that you are always taking and designing for that first-time user experience up front is extremely important. And minimizing the text and instructions, and this is going back to really understanding the user's flows, how they're going to be using your application, and then beginning to make sure that we're not requiring individuals to read a manual before before using your software. And in that regard, what we start to see is that simplicity is a process, not necessarily a concrete end state. It's a discipline that we follow, and we try to begin to bake into the product, and then the evolution of the over the course of a user's use of that product, rather than a concrete end state or something that design is intended to solve. So in driving simplicity within your organization, one action tip that can really help do this from the gate is to actively ID and manage the type of content that exists in your application. What I mean by this is content, that is alerting the user, potentially making tasks easier, and or just enriching the experience, like potentially photos or videos may do. And then really ensuring that you are leveraging it appropriately and in a timely manner. And that really goes back to the context piece of this. Knowing that that progression of conversation that we're having with the user is what drives simplicity, not necessarily lots of white space on the screen, which can be perceived as simple from a visual standpoint. However, if the user can't access something on that screen that they need to, just because it looks simple is going to make your application more difficult to use. The third key that we want to discuss today is clarity. And where simplicity is in fact a process and discipline towards decision making, clarity in many regards is the result of that. And clarity is probably where the mental image in your mind of simplicity exists. And this is really about making the software disappear. What does that mean really at the end of the day? What that means is that individuals are able to pick up and use your software. They're so engrossed with the task at hand that they're doing that the software is no longer perceived as a hindrance to what they're doing, but rather an enablement, and it's becomes sort of a second-hand or a second-hand nature to the user because they can't imagine doing it in any other way or otherwise. What can support clarity and ensuring that your teams are making decisions around the product and the product backlog that support that are ensuring that you're designing as a team. Now, one clarification that I want to make here is that this is not the democratization of design in as much as it is around trying to drive collaboration and across the different functional teams that you have, so that we are going back and designing the right solution for the user at the right time. By creating design developer design sessions and partnering with design potentially for some of those more technical aspects will ultimately lead into higher value or higher quality feature delivery. And approaching design as a team really ensures that we are understanding and looking at the problem more holistically. It's probably a frequent complaint where the design team designs for the ideal, and then the technical team is bringing them, is grounding them. By designing as a team, we begin to break those barriers down so that those teams are collaboratively solving for the problem at hand in the right way. And by involving all the stakeholders in that design process, we ensure we aren't designing software solutions just for business problems, for the business problems, and developing the right solution for the market, the user, and where the business needs to go. Often we think of a product or something being done when it has all the features that are necessary. One approach that designers often take is really defining done when there's nothing more to take away from that screen. Embracing this philosophy of sort of minimalism in a way can really help you to understand where your users are spending the majority of the time, and also which features are the most important for driving the end result. So have a reason for every pixel on that screen, from buttons to shadows to horizontal lines to labels. great design is not about needlessly adding more effects and attributes, but rather eliminating everything that doesn't actively support an end user's goal or their cognition, of a screen. And in that context, I show the IA Writer app, which has been hugely successful on the Mac, because we look at a screen around that is for an application that's focused on writing, and while this has many advanced features, when you're writing, those features don't need to be available to you immediately. And in this way, you see design supporting the activity at hand within the context that a user is going to be, so that there's no friction between the words, what a user wants to say, and allowing those to kind of flow from their fingers into the document. Another pillar of clarity is really helping people to make decisions and aiding them in that process. Users should not have to think about where to go next, right? Highlight important changes or patterns, for example, in a patient's health, and then begin to proactively offer guidance on what and where the user should navigate to next, right? So white space in this context, as we mentioned earlier, can streamline legibility. And it does that by sort of beginning to guide the user towards areas where the important information is, and allows them to really focus that and therefore improve the cognitive efficiency. And by that I mean both the interpretation of what is being displayed and their understanding of that screen, as well as their ability to find the information that they are looking for. Using color in meaningful ways to drive and indicate action is extremely important as well. This relates to your button colors, ensuring that they are consistent throughout the application, and that those are tied with specific actions. So paying careful attention to what may be a primary button color versus a secondary, and ensuring that those two designs accurately reflect those intentions. In other words, if your primary button color is blue, the secondary button color being orange is probably not going to be a good idea in that context. We want to make sure that there's clear understanding throughout every page what is primary and what is secondary. And then begin to direct conversations, and by conversations I mean the content that exists within your application, and tasks to help users stay on the happy path. The more that we are able to control the user's flow through a system, the more pleasant that experience a user is going to have. So by ensuring that we have the right content in place at the right time, with the direction that the user needs, the visual direction both from a design perspective as well as content perspective, we're able to guide users towards their intended outcome. A key insight here, and we encounter this quite often, is oftentimes what individuals may consider a UI design problem is really a content, and I should probably say context problem. UI design is simply knowing how to best serve the right content at the right time. So, when we have a very complex or screen that has a lot of data points on there, going back and asking ourselves, have we eliminated everything off of this screen that does it, can help us avoid the circumstances where an area where an individual may be spending 90% of their time is only given 10% of the screen real estate. So I challenge you that if you do have a complex screen or a particular area within your application that you've been struggling with, take a step back and consider the content that exists on that page and whether all of it is really there for the context that the user would be looking at it in. And that's not to say that one screen isn't intended to serve multiple contexts, but making sure that we're paying attention to really what the progression of use is, and going back to those journey maps that we talked about earlier. building on that, the fourth key of perspective is where we begin to challenge how you begin to look at your roadmap and the decisions that we're making along those roadmaps to drive better experiences for your end users. So in this context, I talk about sticking to not your product roadmap, but rather the experience roadmap that you're delivering to your end user. And this is becoming extremely important as the technology splinters, across multiple devices. And we need to begin to ask ourselves, what features are absolutely critical on what devices, rather than what devices are absolutely critical for our product. To help with this, it's key to kind of define the MVP by user flows rather than features. So if, features are often just one step along a user's decision path. And when you define your MVP by key task flows, then you ensure users can always reach a decision, even if it is heavily restricted to only a single path in the beginning and opens up to more options later on. If a feature might be used, then it's probably not needed for a minimum viable product. So in this picture on the left, you see us working in this flow based model to then begin carving out the features that exist within each of those stages. When you can define that critical path of features according to those tasks, we ensure that experiences are holistically defined even within an MVP concept, and then deciding how deep you should dive into each of those features based on how critical they are to the task at hand. And this is where we're talking about cutting across those silos of journey, rather so that we're developing appropriate feature sets according to the happy path of use. Another perspective that we challenge and bring to you today is this concept of the MMP, or what stands for, in this context, the minimum marketable product. The minimum marketable product is really what represents your quality standards as a firm and a brand, and your strategic position. So think about it as those features within your product where you pay the most attention. These are your features that are used the 90% of the time. So where MVP is largely going to be for validation, right? If a feature lives in an MVP state, you're at that validation stage. You've got it out into production, but there still may be more work on it. MMP becomes your definition of done, and you'll earn your customers' trust the more reliable your software is. And by creating a definition for MVP versus minimum marketable product, you can separate the tactical and strategic decisions at the feature level. And this will help to create a common understanding of a definition of done and where each feature lives within the product's life cycle. This is probably an infographic that you've all seen in one form or another, talking about, the top row is not a true MV, working towards an MVP, whereas the bottom row is an MVP-focused agile approach. And the reason that this circulated widely among the professionals in our industry is because what we see in the bottom row is this continuous validation around, in this context, transportation, helping individuals get from point A to B quicker than they did before. Now, while the car at the end of year 2 may be the ideal solution, what we're able to do by following this MVP-driven approach is to continually give them a solution to their problem, though it may not be ideal right up front. We're able to support them over the course of that path as we evolve a feature or a product, in this context, towards that minimum marketable product, or really that ideal state where we're ready to invest the big bucks in driving market share. Last but not least, from a perspective standpoint, you want to make sure that we're solving the right problem at the right time. Okay, time to market is just as important, as the product itself. And I think it's important to understand that you may have several MVP features that are out in production and live in the production state, but they exist in that way because they're not on that user's critical path. These may be those 20% of features that are important for us, and I put this animation of this illustration of a request for proposal doc, because they may be important, an important checkbox that we need to check off in order to be competitive for our RFPs, but they're not really on the user's critical path where they're spending 90% of the time. Knowing what lives in MVP and versus your MMP state will make sure that you understand the high priority problems and where they exist in your system. This is going to furthermore kind of help drive those decisions, those tricky decisions where, if you have a bug on an MMP feature, that is probably deserves a higher priority than an MVP feature set that exists on a tertiary path for the user. It's important to remember that the timing of a release is almost always critical, but the fidelity of the release is almost always negotiable. And making sure that we're driving fidelity in the right areas of the application is arguably more important than anything else. So walking away from here today, we challenge you to really know and articulate the difference, between what an MVP and an MMP for your company and or product is, and then create and define the acceptance criteria accordingly. Ultimately, this is how delight features, will begin to make their way off the backlog and into your production where it matters. Slowly improving and up-leveling the product as a whole over time. Building on this same concept, because we've talked a lot about prioritizing kind of features and helping to define what lives where, is vision. And staying focused, not only in technology, but specifically in healthcare, where we are often serving multiple gods, so to speak, focus is critical to both driving patient engagement as well as fulfilling our strategic objectives as a firm. So it's important to know and understand where your solution's externalities and why we are ultimately doing whatever the solution may be. So even when we're designing solutions exclusively for, say, physicians or nurses, realizing there's a patient that will also be impacted by your system can begin to change how we begin to approach a problem. So for example, if the solution that you are creating causes the physician or the nurse to suddenly spend most of their time staring at a computer screen rather than engaging with the patient, we may want to rethink how we're going about that solution, either from a device perspective or even from how the design of that solution is, so that we can cater to quick cognition and allow the physician to focus on the matter at hand. So strive to know and understand how your system can impact all users within the healthcare ecosystem. And keep in mind that we're usually, when designing in healthcare, probably at most 2 degrees of separation away from a patient that will ultimately be impacted by positively or negatively by the solution that we're putting out into the market. We're in this ultimately because our ultimate goal is to improve patients' health, and it's probably why a lot of us are in healthcare. And the right question is not, when we're designing something for a provider is how does this improve the provider's workflow, but rather how does this help the provider better care for patients. And it's important that we remain focused, on why we've gotten into this industry and doing the product that we're leveraging, so that we stay focused on the end result or that ideal result that we're striving for, and making decisions, along that path that are in alignment with that. And I challenge you in this regard that, the question, how does your product or service improve the patient experience, is arguably the only question that you should be asking, no matter what industry you are within the healthcare ecosystem. To help get this process, started, document, for your organization and for your product, the best case scenario for the patient that may live at arm's length from your system, and ask yourself, how does your product support that outcome, and begin to make decisions within your firm and about your product accordingly, so that we always remain in alignment with creating a patient-centric environment, and that will have the net result of driving patient engagement. It's clear that we are all connected and in healthcare, and there's nothing that we do that does not involve us needing to work with other providers or vendors. And specifically, driving patient engagement in that environment requires balancing our ideals for the patient and the healthcare industry with what is right for them today. And so we ask you to consider the keys that we just shared with you today, and begin to consider how you can take perhaps small and subtle shifts in your decision-making priorities to drive better experiences and outcomes. Though in the beginning the changes may be rather subtle in the short run, these shifts will ensure you're tackling the highest value problems that will not only drive patient engagement and value over the long run, but also aid in moving the healthcare industry as a whole towards a more idyllic and compassionate, patient-centric world. All of us who are working in healthcare, we are the patient experience. And what we do as a collective whole is what it will ultimately move the industry forward more than any one thing or one company. Thank you for spending this time with me. I sincerely hope that you got something of value out of this, if not inspirational. And Laura, I'll open this up for questions.
Great, thank you, David. We have a couple of questions. The first one, in addition to doing extensive user research, do you recommend looking at what competitors are doing with their apps?
Absolutely, and the reason for this is that competitors help to inform you with where the landscape of healthcare is, or and more specifically, what within the niche that you are in. What I would caution against, though, is seeing something that may be nifty and cool, for the short run, but may not actually drive engagement because of other hurdles that are hindering the patient engagement. So definitely take it within context. Understanding your users, though, their core needs, and where what they're experiencing day to day is ultimately going to be more valuable.
Great, thank you. Second question, research suggests that websites be redesigned every couple of years. Does the same rule apply to apps?
So yes and no. And your app should continuously be evolving over time, and refined over time to better and better support use cases and needs, and in that context, it should drive, it should sort of change. The difference, though, between websites is, websites live in the realm of marketing, and that's for very specific purposes. And websites have a distinct need to always feel fresh, feel cutting edge, feel trendy. That is not necessarily true for your product, especially within the healthcare ecosystem. So while I'm not saying that your apps shouldn't be refreshed on a periodic basis, especially as your brand evolves or changes, what I'm ultimately suggesting is that what drives those changes should be different. And that life cycle is probably, holistic changes to your app are probably much, there's a longer life cycle around that than there would be around your website.
Great, thank you. And our last question, we have a couple of people wondering, how long does the design process typically take when you're doing this type of deep user research and planning? Is it weeks or is it months?
I hate to be the buzzkill. It's forever, Laura. And I only say that just because it's intended, I think done correctly, it's intended to be an ongoing effort, for you and your firm. It's important to remember that a lot of what we discussed here today, and even design thinking or a human-centered design approach, is a holistic philosophy rather than a single activity that you do over the course of product development. That being said, kickstarting the process and kind of building the infrastructure or the foundation that can kind of get you going down this path is where I think the heart of your question lies. And that does not have to be a lengthy process. In many ways, just, and I'm going to throw this out there, but 1 month of dedicated time can drive immense results for at least getting the pieces that you as a firm need in place, and then how that starts to impact designs or training your teams to begin to think more in this manner is what tends to have a longer tail associated with it.
Great. Thank you, David. That brings us to the end of our questions and the end of our webinar. Also, thank you to all of our listeners who made time today during what are always busy days to be a part of this event. As a reminder, we'll be sharing a recording of today's webinar via email tomorrow. And as always, if you have questions about PointClear Solutions, you can find us on the web, www.pointclearsolutions.com. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.